School bus versus semi-truck, 65 miles per hour impact. 30 children trapped inside, gas leaking everywhere, sparks from electrical wires. The bus driver unconscious, emergency exits jammed. Everyone who stopped to help could smell the gasoline spreading under the wreckage. They had maybe 2 minutes before this became a fireball with 30 kids inside. Off-duty ambulance driver Jake Morrison was heading home when he saw the smoke. He pulled over, grabbed his medical kit, and ran toward the wreckage. Other bystanders were backing away from the gas fumes, calling 911, waiting for fire trucks. But Jake wasn't waiting. He was calculating something in his head: blast radius, extraction time, structural weak points. What the crowd didn't know was that Jake had done this exact same thing before. Same scenario: burning vehicle, trapped soldiers, ticking clock. Except that was a Humvee in Fallujah, and Jake Morrison wasn't just an ambulance driver. He was former Marine EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. This wasn't his first race against a bomb. In the next 90 seconds, Jake would have to use every skill he'd learned defusing IEDs in Iraq to save 30 American children. This is his story. Welcome to Unsung Heroes Stories. Before we dive into this heart-stopping rescue, tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe that heroes come in unexpected forms, hit that subscribe button. This story will change how you see the person driving the ambulance in your neighborhood. Route 42 outside Cleveland, Ohio. Tuesday afternoon, 3:47 p.m. The same stretch of highway Jake Morrison had driven hundreds of times in his 5 years as an EMT. School buses always used this route heading back from field trips to the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. The semi-truck driver later told police he never saw the bus. Mechanical failure in his braking system, jackknifed across both lanes just as the yellow school bus crested the hill at 65 miles per hour. Driver tried to swerve, but physics don't negotiate. The impact was catastrophic. The front third of the bus accordioned against the truck's trailer. Windows shattered, metal twisted, and immediately the smell hit everyone within 100 yards. Gasoline, mixed with the acrid smoke of electrical fires. Jake was 3 cars behind when it happened. He'd just finished a 12-hour shift and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. But 30 years of training, first as a Marine, then as an EMT, kicked in before his conscious mind even processed what he was seeing. He pulled his ambulance to the shoulder, grabbed his trauma kit, and started running toward the wreckage while other drivers were still trying to figure out what had happened. That's when he saw the gas spreading under the bus and realized this wasn't just a traffic accident. This was a countdown to an explosion. Jake reached the bus and immediately saw the problem. The impact had ruptured the fuel tank, and electrical sparks were hitting the pavement just inches from the spreading gasoline. He had maybe 90 seconds before ignition. But before we continue, I want you to imagine something. You're driving home from work. You see a burning school bus with 30 kids inside, and you have 90 seconds to decide. Do you wait for professionals, or do you risk everything to save them? Drop your answer in the comments. Jake didn't have time for that debate. His Marine training had taught him to assess, decide, act. No hesitation, no second guessing. Lives depended on speed and precision. First assessment: structural integrity. The front of the bus was crushed, but the passenger compartment was intact. The emergency exit in the back was jammed shut by twisted metal. Side windows were the only way out. Second assessment: casualties. Through the windows, he could see children moving, crying, some unconscious. Bus driver was slumped over the wheel, not responding to the chaos behind him. Third assessment: time. The gas pool was spreading toward electrical components that were throwing sparks every few seconds. In Iraq, Jake had seen vehicles explode from exactly this scenario. He knew the signs. Jake Morrison had been driving ambulances in Cleveland for 5 years. Quiet guy, reliable, never talked about himself. His coworkers knew he was former military, but Jake never mentioned that he'd disarmed over 200 IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Skills that had everything to do with this burning school bus. He climbed onto the side of the bus and started breaking windows with his medical kit. "Kids, listen to me," Jake shouted through the first window he'd cleared. "My name is Jake. I'm here to help. I need everyone to stay calm and listen carefully." Inside the bus, chaos. 30 children between ages 6 and 12, most crying, some screaming, several unconscious from the impact. Jake could see cuts, bruises, possibly broken bones, but his immediate concern wasn't medical treatment. It was getting them away from the bomb this bus was about to become. "I'm going to get you out one at a time. Oldest kids first. You're going to help me with the little ones." Jake wasn't just pulling kids out randomly. He was calculating weight distribution, identifying which sections of the bus were most likely to collapse, and determining the safest extraction sequence. In Iraq, one wrong move meant dead Marines. Here, it meant dead children. The first child out was Marcus, age 12, conscious but scared. "Son, I need you to run to those cars over there and tell the adults to call 911 again. Tell them we need fire trucks now. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded and ran. Second child, Sarah, age 8, crying but mobile. Jake lifted her through the window and set her on the ground. "Sarah, you're going to stand right here and help me count as we get everyone out, okay? You're my helper." As Jake started pulling kids through the emergency window, he heard it, the sound that had haunted him since Iraq. A slow, steady hissing. The gas tank wasn't just leaking, it was building pressure. He'd heard that sound right before a Humvee exploded in Ramadi. Time was running out faster than he'd calculated. In Fallujah, Jake's unit called him the calculator because he could assess explosive situations faster than anyone. He'd saved dozens of Marines by reading blast patterns, fuel dispersal rates, and structural failure points. The worst day of his military career had been March 15, 2006. A roadside bomb had hit a Humvee carrying 4 Marines. Jake's job was to secure the area and extract the wounded before secondary explosions. He'd done it dozens of times before. But that day, there had been children nearby. Iraqi kids who'd been playing in the street when the bomb went off. Jake's orders were clear. Secure American personnel first, civilians second. Military protocol. He'd followed orders, saved all 4 Marines, but by the time he got to the children, one little girl, maybe 7 years old, didn't make it. She'd been 30 seconds away from safety when the secondary explosion hit. Jake had carried that guilt for 8 years. It's why he'd left the Marines. It's why he'd become an EMT. It's why he'd never talked about his military service with anyone. Now, looking at 30 American children trapped in a vehicle that was about to explode, Jake Morrison wasn't going to be 30 seconds too late again. 20 kids out, 10 still trapped. That's when Jake saw the spark getting closer to the fuel pool. In Iraq, this was the moment soldiers either lived or died. Not because of their training, but because of their decisions under impossible pressure. Among the remaining children was 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, same age as the Iraqi girl Jake couldn't save in Fallujah. When Jake saw Emma's face through the window, unconscious but breathing, 5 years of guilt and PTSD crystallized into one moment of absolute clarity. The bus started to shift and creak. Other bystanders who had been helping backed away, but Jake recognized the sound. Metal fatigue under pressure. He'd heard it in armored vehicles before they exploded. He had maybe 30 seconds to get the last 3 kids out. Jake was making split-second decisions that would determine if these children lived or died. Have you ever been in a situation where your quick thinking saved someone's life? Share your story in the comments below. The spark was now just 2 feet from the gas pool. Jake had maybe 15 seconds. He looked at the 10 children still trapped and made the same decision that had earned him a Bronze Star in Fallujah. But what happened next, no training had prepared him for. He grabbed Emma Rodriguez first, unconscious and difficult to maneuver through the window. As he lifted her, he saw her medical alert bracelet, severe asthma. If she didn't get her inhaler soon, the smoke alone could kill her. 9 kids left, 10 seconds. Jake made a decision that went against every safety protocol he'd ever learned. Instead of backing away from the expanding gas pool, he climbed fully into the bus. "Tommy, Lisa, Michael, grab my hands, we're going out the window together." In Iraq, Jake had learned that sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything. This was one of those moments. He lifted the 3 children simultaneously, 2 under his arms, 1 on his back, and dove through the window just as the first spark hit the edge of the gasoline pool. They landed hard on the asphalt, Jake cushioning the children's fall with his own body. His shoulder dislocated on impact, but all three kids were breathing. The explosion came 4 seconds later. The fireball could be seen from 3 miles away. The heat wave knocked everyone within 50 yards to the ground. Windows in nearby cars shattered from the concussion. But when the smoke cleared and everyone picked themselves up off the pavement, they could see 30 children standing together on the grass beside the highway. Scared, some injured, but all alive. Jake Morrison had pulled the last child from that bus with 4 seconds to spare. As parents started arriving at the scene, Jake realized he recognized one of them. Maria Rodriguez, Emma's mother, was the nurse who'd been treating his PTSD at the VA hospital. She'd been helping him deal with his survivor's guilt for months. Now, her daughter's life had been in his hands. When Maria saw Jake sitting on the ambulance bumper, his shoulder obviously dislocated, she didn't say anything at first. She just hugged him while Emma, now conscious and breathing normally, held onto both of them. "You saved her," Maria whispered. "I saved all of them," Jake replied, and for the first time in 8 years, he actually believed it. The media wanted to call Jake a hero. The parents wanted to thank him. The mayor wanted to give him a medal. But Jake Morrison just wanted to go home and process what had happened. Because the last time he'd been called a hero, he'd still felt like a failure. The fire chief who arrived on scene was Captain Williams, a Marine veteran who recognized Jake's tactics immediately. "Son, what's your background?" "Marine EOD, 2 tours Iraq." Williams nodded. "That explains the precision. You ran that extraction like a military operation." It was a military operation, just different stakes. Within hours, the story was all over local news. Off-duty EMT saves 30 children in school bus explosion. The cell phone videos taken by bystanders went viral on social media. But what the news reports didn't capture was how the rescue had affected Jake himself. For 8 years, he'd been haunted by the Iraqi child he couldn't save. He'd undergone therapy, taken medication, tried everything to deal with the guilt and nightmares. Nothing had worked. But saving 30 American children in the exact same scenario had broken something loose in his mind. For the first time since leaving the military, Jake Morrison felt like he'd done something that mattered. What city are you watching from right now? Because this story proves that heroes live in every community. They just don't always wear uniforms. Tell us where you're watching from. The parents of the rescued children organized a community appreciation event. They wanted to honor Jake publicly, but he almost didn't show up. Public recognition made him uncomfortable. When he finally arrived at the school gymnasium where the event was being held, he was surprised to see faces he recognized: Maria Rodriguez from the VA hospital, Captain Williams from the fire department, several of his EMT colleagues who'd never known about his military background. During the appreciation ceremony, the school principal asked Jake to speak about his experience. He'd prepared to keep it brief, thank the community, deflect attention, go home quietly. Instead, he found himself talking about Iraq. 8 years ago, I was in a situation very similar to what happened on Route 42. A vehicle explosion, people trapped, time running out. That day, I followed my orders and saved the soldiers under my command. But there was a little girl, a Iraqi child, about the same age as many of your children. I got to her 30 seconds too late. The gymnasium was completely silent. For 8 years, I've been carrying the guilt of that 30 seconds. It's why I left the military. It's why I became an EMT. I thought if I could save enough people in civilian life, maybe it would balance out the one I couldn't save in Iraq. Jake paused, looking at the 30 children sitting in the front rows with their families. What I learned on Tuesday is that it was never about balancing anything out. That little girl in Iraq died because of circumstances beyond my control. These 30 children lived because I was in the right place at the right time with the right skills. Both are true. Both matter. Maria Rodriguez was crying. So were several other parents. The Marine Corps taught me that sometimes you can't save everyone. But that doesn't mean you stop trying to save someone. 6 months later, Jake received a phone call that would change his life again. The call came from the Department of Veterans Affairs in Washington, D.C. "Mr. Morrison, we've been following your story. We're developing a new program to help veterans with PTSD transition their military skills into civilian emergency response careers. We'd like you to consider heading up the program." Jake was quiet for a moment. "What would that involve?" "Training veterans to become EMTs, firefighters, emergency coordinators, using their military experience to save civilian lives. Basically what you've been doing, but on a national scale." It was an opportunity to turn his personal healing into something that could help thousands of other veterans dealing with similar guilt and transition issues. "There's one condition," Jake said. "The program has to include therapy support. Skills training isn't enough if veterans are still carrying trauma from their military service." "Agreed. When can you start?" Jake looked around his apartment in Cleveland, thinking about the life he'd built as an ambulance driver. Quiet, routine, safe. Then he thought about the 30 children who were alive because he'd been willing to risk everything when it mattered. "Give me 2 weeks to tie up loose ends here." Today, Jake Morrison runs the Veterans Emergency Response Training Program for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The program has trained over 800 veterans to transition their military skills into civilian emergency careers. But he still lives in Cleveland, and he still drives an ambulance part-time. Because, as he tells the veterans he trains, the skills don't matter if you're not willing to use them when someone needs help. Emma Rodriguez, now 12 years old, wants to become an EMT when she grows up. She still sees Jake occasionally at community events, and she always thanks him for saving her life. Jake always tells her the same thing. "You don't need to thank me, Emma. You just need to be ready to help someone else when they need it." The Iraqi girl Jake couldn't save would have been 16 years old now. Jake thinks about her sometimes, but not with guilt anymore, with gratitude. Because her memory motivated him to become the kind of person who could save 30 American children when the moment came. Some heroes wear uniforms, some wear EMT badges, some drive ambulances through Cleveland traffic, carrying skills learned in combat zones, and hearts heavy with both loss and purpose. Jake Morrison learned that heroism isn't about never failing, it's about being willing to try again when lives are on the line. And sometimes, if you're in the right place at the right time with the right skills and the courage to act, you get 90 seconds to change everything. So tell us, have you ever encountered someone like Jake Morrison? Someone whose past experiences, including their failures and trauma, prepared them to be exactly where they needed to be when crisis struck? Someone who turned their worst day into the training that would save lives later? Share their story in the comments. Tell us their name. Honor the veterans who've learned to transform their pain into purpose. Because at Unsung Hero Stories, we believe that every veteran carries skills that could save lives. The question isn't whether they're heroes, it's whether they'll recognize the moment when those skills are needed most. Subscribe if this story moved you. We share these life-changing rescue stories every week. And remember, next time you see an ambulance, a fire truck, or any emergency responder, think about what experiences shaped their ability to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. You might be looking at someone who learned those skills in places most of us will never see, doing things most of us could never imagine.